The great hall of Aurelian Prime was silent in a way that hurt the ears. Tens of thousands of beings stood packed together, their colors, shapes, and breathing rhythms blending into one heavy presence. Above them, high on the crystal throne, sat Queen Sailira of the Valari Empire. Her crown glowed faintly, but its light felt weak compared to the darkness pressing in from every side. Outside the city, the sky burned. Enemy ships filled the upper atmosphere, their shadows passing again and again like slow-moving storms. The war had lasted 6 long cycles. 6 cycles of retreat, loss, and promises that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow never was. Queen Sailira looked down at her people. Soldiers with damaged armor stood beside civilians who had lost homes, families, and hope. Children clutched their parents. Elders leaned on staffs that shook almost as much as their faith. She could feel their thoughts brushing against her mind: fear, exhaustion, and one terrible question none of them dared speak aloud. Was this the end? She rose from her throne, and the hall reacted at once. Banners lowered, heads bowed. Even now, her people respected her. That knowledge cut deeper than any enemy weapon. "My people," she began, her voice carried by hidden amplifiers, steady despite the storm inside her chest. "The enemy fleet has broken our outer defense line. By the next rotation, they will reach this world." And a low sound moved through the crowd. Not panic. Panic had burned out long ago. This was something worse. Acceptance. "Our allies have withdrawn," the Queen continued. "They fear the enemy's strength. I cannot blame them." She paused, choosing honesty over comfort. "We do not have the numbers to win a direct battle." Her hands tightened at her sides. Valari queens were trained from birth to Project Calm, but this moment tested her limits. "We will make a final stand," she said. "Not because victory is certain, but because surrender would erase everything we are." No cheers answered her, only silence. At the back of the hall, among workers, traders, and off-world visitors, stood a human. His name was Elias Ward, though no one here knew it or cared to ask. To the Valari, he was just another soft-skinned outsider from a young species. Humans were present in the Empire as technicians, translators, and laborers. They were useful, polite, and fragile. No one expected more. Elias had arrived on Aurelian Prime 3 months earlier, hired to help repair communication arrays damaged by orbital strikes. He had watched the war from the edges, always told to stay out of the way when alarms sounded. He had followed orders. Humans were good at that too, when survival demanded it. But today felt different. As the Queen spoke of a final stand, Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had felt it before back on Earth, watching old footage of ruined cities, hearing stories passed down from grandparents about wars humanity had barely survived. The hall felt heavy with surrender. Elias looked around and saw beings who had already accepted death as a fact, not a possibility. That frightened him more than the enemy fleet ever could. Queen Sailira lifted her chin. "You may return to your shelters. Prepare yourselves. Whatever tomorrow brings, you will face it as Valari." She turned slightly, signaling the end of the address. That was when Elias moved. At first, it was only a step forward. Then another. His boots echoed loudly against the polished floor, the sound strangely sharp in the silence. Several Valari guards turned, startled, their hands hovering near weapons. "Stop," one of them hissed in a clicking accent. "This is not your place, human." Elias stopped, but he did not step back. Queen Sailira noticed the disturbance and looked down. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she focused on the small, pale figure standing alone among towering aliens. "What is this?" she asked calmly. Elias swallowed. Every instinct screamed at him to sit down, to disappear, to survive quietly. Humans had done that many times in their history. But humans had also learned something else. Sometimes, silence was more dangerous than speaking. "My queen," Elias said, his voice not loud but clear. He had practiced the Valari title carefully. "I know," I am not invited to speak. A ripple of irritation moved through the guards. One raised his weapon fully now. Queen Sailira lifted a finger, stopping them. You may speak, she said, curiosity slipping into her tone. Briefly, Elias nodded. His heart pounded so hard he feared others could hear it. You say you cannot win, he said. That your numbers are too small. That your allies are gone. Yes, the Queen replied. These are facts. Facts can change, Elias said. A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Several Valari officers exchanged looks that clearly said this human was foolish. Queen Sailira tilted her head. Explain. Elias took a breath. Humans were told the same things. Many times. We were told our enemies were stronger, smarter, better prepared. We were told surrender would save lives. He paused, choosing simple words. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But every time we survived, it was because someone refused to believe the war was already lost. One of the generals stepped forward, his armor marked by old burns. You are a laborer, he snapped. You do not understand fleet warfare. Elias met the general's gaze. His hands shook, but he did not look away. I understand loss. I understand fighting when logic says you shouldn't. And I understand enemies who think they have already won. The hall grew quieter. Queen Sailira felt something unexpected stir inside her. Not hope, she had learned not to trust that, but interest. The human did not speak like a dreamer. He spoke like someone who had stood in ruins and kept walking. You believe we should continue, she said. I believe you should fight differently. Elias replied. Your enemy expects you to defend every world, every station, every symbol. They think you are proud. Predictable. Some officers bristled at that. Humans learned long ago. Elias went on. That pride can be a weapon used against you. Sometimes, you survive by letting go. A long pause followed. The Queen studied him, truly studied him now. He was smaller than her guards, unarmed, and very easy to kill. Yet he stood as if he had already accepted that possibility. What is your name? She asked. Elias Ward, he said. And what do you offer, Elias Ward? She asked softly. Words alone do not stop fleets. Elias swallowed again. I offer a different way of thinking. Let me speak to your strategists. If I am wrong, you lose nothing. If I am right, you might give your people something they haven't felt in a long time. And what is that? The Queen asked. Elias looked around at the silent crowd, at soldiers waiting to die, at children who had never known peace. A reason to stand up, he said. Not because they are ordered to, but because they choose to. The hall remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. Queen Sailira slowly lowered herself back onto her throne. The War Council watched her, tense. Very well, she said at last. You will speak to my command circle. Gasps spread through the hall. If you waste our time, she added, her eyes sharp, you will be escorted off this world. Elias bowed deeply, relief almost knocking him over. That's fair. As the guards moved to escort him forward, Queen Sailira looked out once more at her people. For the first time in many cycles, she did not see only resignation in their faces. She saw questions, and somewhere, deep beneath the weight of war, a fragile spark began to glow. Its walls were layered with glowing tactical displays, star maps, and living data streams that shifted with every passing second. Fleet positions pulsed in cold colors. Enemy formations glowed red, pressing inward like a tightening fist. The room smelled faintly of charged metal and stress. Queen Sailira sat at the center, her throne lowered to council level. Around her stood the highest military minds of the Valari Empire admirals with centuries of service, strategists trained since hatchling age, and commanders whose bodies bore the marks of countless battles. And among them stood a human in a plain work uniform. Elias Ward felt very small. Every eye in the chamber watched him. Some burned with anger, others with disbelief, a few with open contempt. To them, He was an error in the system. Something that should not be here. Admiral Kethral broke the silence first. His voice was sharp, clipped. This is a waste of time. The enemy will breach the inner defense line within 2 rotations. We do not need philosophy from a technician. Several officers clicked their agreement. Elias looked to Queen Sailira. She met his gaze calmly. "You asked to speak to my command circle," she said. "You have their attention. Use it." Elias nodded. His mouth was dry, but his mind felt strangely clear. "I won't pretend I understand all your technology," he began. "Your ships are stronger than anything humans have built. Your weapons are precise. Your tactics are clean." That word caused a few frowns. "But that's also the problem," Elias continued. "Your enemy knows exactly how you will fight." A strategist stepped forward, her skin shimmering with irritation. "We fight with honor and efficiency." "Yes," Elias said simply. "And they count on that." He reached toward one of the glowing maps. A guard moved, but the Queen gestured for him to stop. Elias touched the edge of the display, and the system adjusted to his input. "This line here," Elias said, pointing to a cluster of outer colonies marked in fading blue. "You are trying to defend all of them." "They are Valari worlds," Admiral Kethral snapped. "We do not abandon our own." "I know," Elias replied. "That's why the enemy is attacking them first." The room grew quieter. "They stretch your fleets thin," Elias went on. "They force you to react. You lose ships, not because you fight poorly, but because you fight everywhere." Queen Sailira leaned forward slightly. "What would you suggest instead?" Elias took a breath. "This was the hard part. You let them take ground," he said. The reaction was instant. Voices rose. Officers protested. One slammed a clawed hand against a console. "Madness! Cowardice! That would shatter morale." Elias waited. He did not raise his voice. He had learned long ago that shouting never changed minds. Queen Sailira raised her hand. Silence returned. "Explain," she said. Elias nodded. "Humans have a saying. Don't fight the war your enemy wants. Your enemy expects you to defend every symbol of your empire. They expect you to bleed yourselves dry doing it." He shifted the map again. Enemy supply lines appeared long, glowing threads stretching deep into hostile space. "They are far from home," Elias said. "Confident, overextended. They believe you are desperate." Admiral Kethral narrowed his eyes. "And we are." "Yes," Elias agreed. "That's why this works." He marked several key nodes along the enemy lines. "You stop defending everything. You fall back to positions that matter. Not planets, people, shipyards, command hubs." A young commander hesitated, then spoke. "That would leave millions under occupation." Elias looked at her, his expression serious. "Occupation is not extinction. Your queen said surrender would erase who you are. This doesn't. This buys time." The words hung heavy in the air. Queen Sailira felt her thoughts pulling in 2 directions. Every instinct screamed against abandoning worlds. Yet she could not deny the truth of what the humans said. They were losing because they were trying to be everywhere at once. "What then?" she asked. "Then," Elias said, "you hit what they can't easily replace." He highlighted the supply nodes again. Fuel depots. Communication relays. Not with big fleets. With small, fast strikes. A strategist shook her head. "Our doctrine forbids such attacks. They are indirect." Elias met her gaze. "Indirect wins wars," he continued, confidence growing. "You don't need to destroy everything. You just need to make them doubt. Make them slow down. Make their commanders argue." The room was silent again, but this time it was thoughtful. Queen Sailira studied the enemy formations. For the first time in many cycles, she saw them not as an unstoppable wall, but as something stretched too thin. "And morale?" she asked. "My people are already tired." Elias looked around the room. "That's where humans are. Different." Some officers stiffened at the word. "When humans are told they are losing," Elias said, "some give up. But others get stubborn. They fight harder when the odds are bad." especially when they are fighting for each other, not territory. He pointed toward the city beyond the walls. Your people don't need promises of victory. They need to feel like their actions matter. Admiral Kethral crossed his arms. And you think this will inspire them? I think, Elias said carefully, that watching a weak human stand here and refuse to accept defeat already has. Several eyes flicked toward him. The truth of that statement was uncomfortable. Queen Sailira exhaled slowly. She could feel the mood shifting, subtle but real. If I allow this, she said, you will be responsible for advising operations. Elias nodded. I understand. You will not command Valari soldiers, she continued. But you will speak freely. That's all I ask, Elias replied. She looked to her council. We will test this strategy. Murmurs rippled through the room, fear mixed with something new. Hope. The first operations were small, almost invisible. Valari strike teams slipped past enemy patrols, hitting supply depots and vanishing. Communication relays went dark. Enemy convoys arrived late, confused, and poorly coordinated. Reports began to change tone. Enemy response delayed. Enemy forces regrouping. Enemy commanders requesting clarification. Queen Sailira read each report carefully. With every success, the crushing weight on her chest eased just a little. Still, not everyone believed. One night cycle later, an alarm rang through the palace. An enemy probe fleet had discovered one of the fallback positions. Admiral Kethral turned to Elias. Your strategy has drawn attention. Elias nodded. Good. The admiral stared at him. Explain. Attention means they're reacting, Elias said. Not controlling the fight. That's when mistakes happen. Queen Sailira watched the displays as enemy formations shifted in uncertain patterns. For the first time, they did not move like a single mind. She looked at the human beside her. You are not afraid, she said quietly. Elias shook his head. I am. I just don't let it decide for me. The queen straightened, her voice firm. Continue the operations. As the orders went out, something changed across the empire. Soldiers spoke more openly. Civilians volunteered for support roles. Rumors spread not of victory, but of resistance. And at the center of it all stood a human who refused to kneel. Far beyond Aurelian Prime, the enemy commanders argued over missing supplies, delayed orders, and strange Valari movements. They did not yet understand what was happening, but the war had changed direction, and for the first time, it was humanity's way of fighting that guided it. Queen Sailira noticed it first. In the silence, between reports, there were still losses, still alarms, still ships that did not return, but the steady march toward defeat had slowed. The enemy no longer advanced with confidence. They paused. They adjusted. They questioned. Inside the command chamber, the glowing maps shifted again and again, but now the red markers flickered instead of pressing forward. They are hesitating, Admiral Kethral said, disbelief clear in his voice. Elias Ward stood beside the tactical table, arms crossed, eyes focused. They're confused, he replied. That's worse for them than fear. Over the past few cycles, Valari strike teams had carried out dozens of small operations. None were large enough to be called battles. None would be remembered as heroic last stands. But together, they were doing something no fleet had managed before. They were wearing the enemy down. Enemy supply ships arrived empty or late. Orders contradicted each other. Entire task groups waited for commands that never came. And every time the enemy adjusted, the Valari were already gone. Queen Sailira watched one such operation unfold on the display. A small Valari squadron dropped out of faster-than-light travel near an enemy relay station. They fired once precise, controlled and vanished before return fire could even lock on. The relay went dark. That station was considered secure, a strategist said quietly. Elias nodded. They considered many things secure. The Queen folded her hands. The cost? Minimal, Admiral Kethral admitted. No losses. A quiet sound moved through the chamber, not celebration but relief. Still, the pressure remained. The enemy was wounded, not defeated. And now, they were angry. That anger came swiftly. An emergency alert flared across every screen. Enemy fleet emerging near Corthalan shipyards, an officer announced. Large formation. They've committed heavily. Corthalan was vital. One of the last major shipyards still producing war vessels. Losing it would cripple the Empire. The room tensed. They've learned, Admiral Kethral said. They are forcing a direct engagement. Queen Sailira turned to Elias. This is not a small strike. No, Elias agreed. It's a test. A test of what? She asked. Of whether we panic, he said. The Queen straightened. We do not abandon Corthalan. Elias nodded. Agreed. But we don't meet them head-on either. The council looked between them. Elias stepped forward, adjusting the display. They expect you to rush everything you have to defend the shipyards. That's what any reasonable commander would do. And you? Admiral Kethral asked. I'd let them think they've won, Elias said. A sharp intake of breath followed. We show them a defense, Elias continued. Just enough to make them commit. Then we pull back at the right moment. And leave the shipyards exposed? A commander demanded. Only on the surface, Elias replied. Your people know the terrain. They don't. Queen Sailira's eyes narrowed as understanding began to form. You want them to overextend inside the system. Yes, Elias said. Once they're in deep, we cut their exits. Not destroy them, confuse them. Jam communications. Split their forces. Admiral Kethral was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Risky. All wars are, Elias said. The Queen considered. Every instinct screamed caution. But this war had already taught her one truth: playing safe was killing them. Prepare the operation, she ordered. The trap was set carefully. Valari defenders took visible positions near the shipyards. Sensor readings were allowed to leak. Defensive fleets appeared just strong enough to provoke confidence. The enemy took the bait. Their ships poured into the Corthalan system, weapons powered, formations tight. To them, it looked like the final blow. Then the Valari fell back, not in panic but in order. Enemy commanders hesitated. Some pushed forward. Others slowed, suspecting deception. Conflicting orders rippled through their ranks. That was when the second phase began. Valari jamming units activated. Long-range communications failed. Navigation beacons flickered. Enemy formations began to drift apart. Small Valari strike groups hit from unexpected angles, not attacking ships but systems. Engines stalled. Sensors went blind. Inside the command chamber, reports flooded in. Enemy Group Delta isolated. Enemy command ship unable to transmit. Multiple enemy vessels retreating without orders. Queen Sailira watched in stunned silence. They're breaking, Admiral Kethral whispered. Not yet, Elias said. But they're scared. Fear changed everything. Enemy ships began firing wildly. Some collided. Others turned on their own escorts, mistaking them for attackers. When the Valari counterattack came, it was controlled and precise. They did not chase fleeing ships. They did not overcommit. They struck, withdrew, and struck again. By the time the enemy managed to regroup, the system was lost to them. Corthalan still stood. Across the Empire, the news spread like fire. They held. They pushed the enemy back. We didn't lose. In shelters and barracks, Valari citizens listened in disbelief. Soldiers who had prepared for death now spoke of tomorrow. Civilians volunteered for rebuilding and support. The mood shifted not to joy, but to determination. Queen Sailira walked the halls that cycle without escort. She wanted to see her people with her own eyes. She passed a group of young soldiers repairing armor. One noticed her and froze. "My queen," he said, lowering his head. She smiled softly. "You fought well." The soldier hesitated, then spoke. "We fought smarter." She knew who he meant. Later, back in the command chamber, Queen Sailira stood alone with Elias. "You have changed my empire," she said. Elias shook his head. "They changed themselves. I just reminded them how." She studied him. "You risk yourself often. The enemy now knows a human advises us. They will target you." "I know," Elias said calmly. "Why continue?" she asked. You could ask for evacuation, safety. Elias looked at the map, at the countless lives behind every marker. Humans don't always fight for their own species, he said. Sometimes we fight for the idea that giving up isn't acceptable. The Queen nodded slowly. Far away, in enemy command space, anger turned to fear. Reports piled up, lost ships, broken formations, delays they could not explain. Their enemy was no longer predictable, no longer honorable in the old sense. A new word began to circulate among their commanders. Human. It was not spoken with mockery anymore. It was spoken with caution. As Queen Sailira returned to her throne, she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel since the war began. Not hope, confidence. The war was far from over. But now, the enemy was no longer certain they would win, and that made all the difference. The enemy did not retreat right away. They gathered their remaining fleets at the edge of Valari space, silent and watchful, like a wounded predator deciding whether to strike again or flee. For the first time since the war began, weeks passed without a major assault. That silence was heavy. Queen Sailira stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over Aurelian Prime. The city lights glowed softly below, steady and alive. Once, those lights had flickered during every alarm. Now they remained on, even when warning sirens sounded. Her people no longer rushed for shelters in blind fear. They moved with purpose. Inside the command chamber, Elias Ward studied the latest reports. They're reorganizing, Admiral Kethral said. Pulling forces back, consolidating. They're deciding, Elias replied. Deciding what? A strategist asked. Whether continuing this war is worth the cost, Elias said. Queen Sailira entered the chamber, her presence commanding immediate silence. She took her seat and looked at the gathered leaders. They will strike once more, she said calmly. Not because they believe they will win, but because pride will not allow them to leave quietly. Elias nodded. That means one final push. And it will be hard. The Queen's eyes met his. Then we end it. The enemy's final assault came sooner than expected. A massive fleet jumped into Valari space, near the border systems. Larger than any force they had sent before. It was not subtle. It was not careful. It was a declaration. They wanted a decisive battle. Across the Empire, alarms sounded, but this time, there was no panic. Valari fleets moved into position, not rushing, not scattering. They followed plans refined through months of hard lessons. Supply lines were secured. Civilians were evacuated. Calmly, soldiers took their places with steady hands. Elias stood beside Queen Sailira as the first clashes appeared on the tactical display. This is it, Admiral Kethral said. If we fail here, we won't, the Queen said, her voice firm. The battle unfolded across multiple systems. The enemy advanced aggressively, trying to force the Valari into a direct, overwhelming engagement. But the Valari did not give them what they wanted. Instead, they bent. Valari forces yielded ground in controlled steps, drawing the enemy deeper, stretching their formations. Small units struck supply ships and command relays. Larger fleets appeared, vanished, then reappeared where least expected. Confusion spread through enemy ranks. They're hesitating again, a sensor officer reported. Conflicting orders detected. Elias watched closely. They're afraid of committing fully. They remember Corthalin. The turning point came when the enemy flagship pushed too far forward. It was massive, heavily armored, and filled with their highest commanders. They believed its presence would force the Valari to break. Queen Sailira straightened. Now, she said. Valari forces sprang into motion. Jamming fields activated. Enemy escorts were cut off from the flagship. Precision strikes, disabled engines and sensors, not destroying, but trapping. The enemy flagship drifted, blind, and isolated. Across the battlefield, enemy morale collapsed. Some ships tried to retreat and found no clear path. Others froze, waiting for orders that never came. Valari fleets closed in not in rage, but in control. Within hours, the battle was over. The enemy did not surrender formally. They simply withdrew, pulling what ships they could back toward their own space. No pursuit followed. The war was finished. Silence fell across the command chamber as the final reports came in. Enemy fleet exiting Valari territory. No further hostile signals detected. All systems secure. Queen Sailira closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, her gaze was clear. "Signal all worlds," she said. "The war is over." The announcement spread faster than any fleet ever had. On Aurelian Prime, citizens stopped in the streets, staring at public displays. Some did not believe it. Others laughed softly. Many simply sat down, overwhelmed. In the great hall where it had all begun, Queen Sailira addressed her people once more. This time, the hall was filled not with despair, but with quiet strength. "My people," she said, "we stand here today not because we were the strongest, but because we refused to fall." She turned slightly and gestured. "Step forward, Elias Ward." A murmur moved through the crowd as the human walked out from among the officials. He wore the same plain uniform as always. He looked uncomfortable. The queen faced him. "This human stood among you when defeat felt certain," she said. "He did not command fleets. He did not wield weapons. He reminded us of something we had forgotten." She looked back at the crowd. "That survival is a choice." She turned to Elias again. "On behalf of the Valari Empire, I offer you honor, status, and a place among our leaders." The hall held its breath. Elias bowed his head. "My queen," he said gently, "I'm honored. But I don't want power." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. "I didn't come here to lead an empire," Elias continued. "I came here because I saw people who deserved to live." The queen studied him, then smiled a rare, genuine expression. "Then what do you ask?" she said. "That humans be remembered," Elias said. "Not as weak, not as background, but as allies." The queen raised her voice so all could hear. "Let it be recorded," she declared, "that humanity stood with us when the night was darkest. From this day forward, humans are allies of the Valari Empire, equals in war and peace." The hall erupted not in wild noise, but in deep, resonant approval. Later, as the city celebrated quietly, Queen Sailira stood once more on the balcony. Elias joined her, looking out at the lights. "You could have asked for much more," she said. Elias shrugged. "I already got what mattered." "What is that?" she asked. He looked at the city. A future. Far away, in enemy space, commanders spoke of the war in hushed tones. They did not talk about Valari weapons or ships. They talked about humans, about a species that should have been insignificant, about how everything changed when one of them stood up in a crowd and refused to accept the end. And across the galaxy, a new truth began to spread. Humanity did not need to rule the stars to shape them. They only needed to stand when others sat down.